Hi there. Welcome to the Bowery Boys. This is Greg Young.
And this is Tom Myers, and today we're going to get lost, or at least a little geographically challenged, in one of our favorite places to get turned around in Manhattan.
Yes.
We're talking about the West Village. It is an impossibly charming neighborhood of historic homes and irregular blocks, beloved taverns, and quite a few mysteries.
Now, the West Village is both one of New York's oldest neighborhoods, okay, so with roots going back to the Dutch and English colonial days, very old, but also in another way, it's a somewhat new neighborhood.
New, or maybe you mean trendy, because the West Village has been trendy for a number of decades. Millions of non-New Yorkers know the streets of this neighborhood if they're fans of the TV show Sex and the City. Because Sarah Jessica Parker's character, Carrie Bradshaw, may have lived on the Upper East Side on the show, but in reality, they filmed the exterior of the row house at 66 Perry Street in the West Village. So it has been trendy since the 1990s and known for its coffee shops and trendy brunch places. Is that what you mean?
Not quite, actually. So the West Village, okay, quotes, the West Village, as hinted in its name, is west of, or rather, the western section of Greenwich Village, which is the sprawling district with Washington Square Park as its centerpiece. So in that respect, it does trace back to the Dutch settlers, such as old Wouter van Twiller and that lot, and to the distant world of old burial grounds and forgotten creeks, but as a distinct neighborhood, okay, as something we call, quote unquote, West Village, it's only been around, or rather known as that, since about the 1940s.
Okay, so the term West Village is newer than the actual place.
Yes.
But it is distinct from Greenwich Village. So today we are going to explore the story of this neighborhood, the West Village. It is romantic, it's peaceful, unusually quiet for where it is, and streets seem to kind of do their own thing and defy the grid. And we'll get into why that's the case later in the show.
Yeah, I mean, for instance, in defying that grid, it also gives us one of our favorite seemingly impossible intersections in the city, the magical intersection of West 4th and West 11th Streets, okay? Everything is possible in the West Village. Time and space warp in the West Village. It's also a place known for Magnolia Bakery, the White Horse Tavern, Marie's Crisis, the Village Vanguard. And also, it's central to the story of New York industrial history, theater and literary history, religious and maritime history, and of course, even queer history.
So today's show, we're going to go way back to the very beginning, before, of course, that name had even been coined.
Excellent. I can't wait. But can I just ask a very basic, fundamental question here?
Okay. Yes, sure.
How are we defining the West Village for our audience?
Oh, boy. Greg, did you know that New Yorkers have opinions about that?
Really?
So let's start with the good news. Most people agree on its western border, the Hudson River.
Yes, that's true. And generally speaking, like a northern border, it goes up to West 14th Street.
Ish.
Ish, right. Right. Because there's like a little triangle that we won't get too much into that's north of Gansevoort that is referred to as the meatpacking district today.
Right, okay. But the real issue, folks, is the eastern border of the neighborhood, because there's one camp that puts it down 6th Avenue, while another puts it down 7th Avenue.
And, this is kind of silly because when you're there, does it really matter? Like when you're walking around, it's just kind of semantics at the end of the day.
Totally agree. But I do think that it is, kind of important for places like Christopher Park, right, where Christopher Street hits 7th Avenue. That is east of 7th Avenue. So technically, by one definition, it's in Greenwich Village. But I mean, this is also where you're going to find Stonewall and the Duplex and the Monster, and Julius is just right around the corner. Are you going to tell me that that's not the West Village?
We're 2 minutes into the show, Tom, and you've already taken us to the Duplex. It must be like Friday night in 1999 for us right now. Thank you for bringing that.
If only it were. And you know we're going to Marie's Crisis, like, as soon as possible in the show.
So the point being, just as we go forward here, is that eastern border is fuzzy.
Even fuzzier after a night at the Duplex and the Monster and Stonewall and Julius.
Hopping around, right. And by the way, the southern border, so we can move on here, is roughly West Houston Street.
Again, ish. Yes. It depends on, if we're just sticking to the historic designation reports. But yes, let's call it West Houston Street.
And anyway, the whole 7th, 6th Avenue controversy is irrelevant when you consider, again, as I mentioned, that the term West Village is a relatively modern term anyway. It's really all the village. And for today's show, it's just all village.
Well, and actually, the village as a term is modern. The actual place would become Greenwich and then Greenwich Village. But actually, for much of the 19th and early 20th century, these neighborhoods were called by their political names, right? There was the 9th Ward, which was everything that was west of 6th Avenue, and the 15th Ward for the village that was east of 6th, and the blocks in, north and south of Washington Square.
So let's place all of this on the big map here, right? It's a couple miles north of Lower Manhattan, which is, of course, was where the first settlement of New Amsterdam and then New York City was located. So taking it all the way back to the beginning, when did this area first become inhabited?
Well, actually, there were residents here long before the Dutch arrived. There was a Lenape settlement called Sapekanakan, that was located around today's meatpacking district. The Lenape camped here, and they fished, and they grew crops here.
Fished in the Hudson River or the North River.
That's right.
Which we'll talk about later. And also there was a stream here called the Minetta Brook or Creek, which actually ran right through all of the West Village at this time.
Or most of it, yeah. And Minetta Creek, though, is one of Manhattan's largest natural watercourses. It flows down from today's Union Square area through Washington Square, and then along a course which would later be named Minetta Lane and Minetta Street, all the way to the river. And yeah, there was great trout fishing in the Minetta.
I think you can get great trout at a West Village restaurant today,
along
right?
the Minetta, yeah.
So the Dutch arrived in New York Harbor around 1624, right? So how long was this native encampment Sapekanakan? How long was it here? Because, of course, the Dutch arrived into New York Harbor around 1624.
Well, it was seriously encroached upon during the Dutch days and then abandoned by the 1660s. But there was a lot of activity happening around it because during the Dutch period, a vast swath of land 2 miles north of New Amsterdam, west of the Bowery Road, had been mapped out and named Noordwijk, or the North Village. And in the 1630s, Director General Wouter van Twiller claimed 300 acres of this land and called this the Bossenbowery, or the farm in the woods. And he turned much of it into a tobacco plantation.
That is so Wouter van Twiller, isn't it?
That's the T-shirt I want to get you.
I'll just add, though, that, he didn't just do it here, right? I mean, think of the bigger picture here. He was also grabbing land over in Red Hook, 3 of the city's islands. But, so that's what was going on. On a bigger picture, I digress.
But when Wouter left the island in the 1630s, he divided up the land into farms for 2 men, Jan van Rotterdam and Francis Lastly. And the country lane that separated these 2 parcels would in time become known as Christopher Street.
But during this period, it was more than just that. There was another group that settled here or was allowed to settle here, the formerly enslaved Black residents of New Amsterdam.
Yes, they had been granted half freedom usually because they had fulfilled a sort of contract and were then given a small piece of land to farm and to raise food for themselves and also for other residents of New Amsterdam. This land of the blacks was actually much larger than just today's village. It stretched as far east as around today's Astor Place, but it included plots between Christopher and around what would become West Houston Street today. And there were other lots that were south of today's Washington Square.
And while this arrangement might strike some as progressive, at least considering what was about to come with the English, these freed black lots also provided another function for the city of New Amsterdam. They served as kind of a buffer, protection from outside attacks because they were sort of outside the town limits.
That's right. And any attacker would have to cross these farms first on their way down to New York, or rather New Amsterdam.
And actually, this underscores how this area that we're speaking about today is really, really far outside the settlement.
It was very rural. And in 1679, now under English rule, a Dutch settler here named Jellis de Mandeville bought about 30 acres from the old Bossin Bowery, which was, over bordering the Hudson River. Now, he had been living in New Amersfoort, which is in today's Flatlands neighborhood of Brooklyn, in a small settlement that was called the Pine District, or in Dutch, Greenwich.
Aha! I was wondering where the word is coming from. Okay, so I see where you're going now.
Yes, and then so under English rule, the name would be anglicized to Greenwich. And other, farms and buildings would be constructed near and around it. And this little enclave, other little enclaves that were dotting the countryside were often referred to as villages.
Yeah, there were actually a lot of little villages here or there, right? I mean, you had the Harlem Village way up north, and then, of course, Bowery Village was just east of here.
That's right. So in 1696, in Jellis de Mandeville's will, the property was recorded as residing in Greenwich Village.
But at this point, there isn't really what we would consider a village here at all, right? I mean, we have a romantic notion of what a village here, but that's not quite what transpired.
No, we're talking about a sort of cluster of dwellings and farms all the way over by the Hudson, kind of the meatpacking area. Not really a village.
Because when I think of village, I think of something a little bit more like fantasy realm, like Smurf's Village from Lord of the Rings. But these are a lot more modest, a lot more practical, smaller developments.
Right. No Papa Smurf, no Smurfette walking.
Oh my gosh.
Today there might be a Smurfette walking around the streets, walking down Gansevoort, but not here in the 1670s.
Okay, but another major institution is about to enter the picture here because they will come into a whole lot of land in their possession, right?
A whole lot of land, yes.
Yeah.
In 1705, under English rule, the British monarch, Queen Anne, gave a huge 215-acre swath of land on the west side of Lower Manhattan to Trinity Church, which was a part of the Church of England at the time.
And this was an incredibly generous and large gift. So essentially, it's from where Trinity Church is today, right? It's from that area, like Wall Street, Fulton Street today, on the west, all the way up to today's Christopher Street.
Yes, and pretty much everything west of Broadway for much of that.
Yeah.
Enormous. Understandably, they also, named it the Queen's Farm. It's the least they could do. Now, in 1740, along came a British naval captain named Sir Peter Warren, who had made quite a fortune for himself through the spoils of war, etc. He was able to buy up the land that was north of this Queen's Farm from Christopher all the way up to about today's 21st Street. And much of it stretching way over to Broadway. And Warren, by the way, was now well connected to the city's early aristocracy because he had married Susanna Delancey.
Delancey. Ooh,
Yes.
okay.
So they set up a lavish estate up here, and they became, according to the author John Strasbaugh in his 2013 book, The Village, 400 Years of Beats and Bohemians, Radicals and Rogues, they became the first of the city's wealthy elite to move up to the area. And we should note that, like many of the city's elite at the time, Warren owned enslaved people and owned a sizable number of slaves on his estate here.
But he would only live here for what, like a little over a decade, because Peter Warren died 1752, at which point his three daughters, who weren't even here, they were over in England, they inherited this far-off estate.
That's right. And their ownership lives on in some of the place names, as one of the daughters was married off to the 4th Earl of Abingdon.
That sounds familiar to me. Abington Square is in the West Village at 8th Avenue and Bleecker.
That's right. And another daughter would be married to Lieutenant General William Skinner.
Okay, that one is less clear to me.
Well, that was a trick question.
Okay.
The street that would become Christopher Street was known for this period as Skinner Road.
Okay, so when Peter Warren's daughters inherited this huge chunk of land, which at the time actually went all the way up to 21st Street, so a little bit outside our borders today, what did they do with all this land?
They mostly started parceling it off and selling big chunks of it to other wealthy families. When you look at old maps of the area, you'll see some big names. You'll see the Brevorts and the Delanceys and the Bayards. Meanwhile, a wealthy retired British naval officer, Captain Thomas Clark, bought land from about today's 21st Street up to 24th Street, so adjacent to this in the 1760s, and he named it Chelsea.
Aha! All right. So we have a whole show on Chelsea. So like, if you want to know more about that detour of history, go back to our episode 379. Because if I remember, Thomas Clark's grandson is Clement Clark Moore.
Or was.
Was his grandson. Yes.
So that's episode 379 on Clement Clark Moore and the history of Chelsea. And we'll be coming back to Clement in a moment in the show because he shows up again in the West Village. Not going to tell you where. And meanwhile, at the same time, south of Christopher Street, Major Abraham Mortier leased land from Trinity in the mid-1760s near the intersection of today's Varick and Van Dam. And there he constructed a very fine estate for himself with views out over the river, and he called it Richmond Hill.
Oh, okay. So this place has also shown up in many of our shows before because Richmond Hill has national importance because it served as the headquarters for General George Washington in 1776. And then a few years later, in 1789, during George Washington's administration, when New York was the capital city of the United States, Richmond Hill here then became the official residence of the vice president, John Adams.
But of course, the capital would move on pretty quickly. And so in the 1790s, this same Richmond Hill estate would be sold off to another man who coincidentally would become vice president, none other than Aaron Burr.
Yeah, actually it was from this fine house, Richmond Hill, in 1804 that Aaron Burr left the estate, went over to Weehawken, New Jersey, and left to duel and, of course, kill Alexander Hamilton.
And after the duel, Hamilton would be rowed back over to today's West Village, arriving at a pier that was part of William Bayard Jr.'s estate around today's Horatio Street. But Greg, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Going back to the same year that Richmond Hill was completed, so 1767, okay? Let's go back.
Okay.
The New York Public Library has some amazing maps from this period, which we're going to link to. Now, one of these, the Ratzer map, is from 1766, 1767, and it shows today's Greenwich Street that is running parallel, along the Hudson from the city of New York, right, way down at the tip of Manhattan, north through the countryside to a small hamlet around today's 14th Street. And this road on the map is labeled the Road to Greenwich. And, you see it go past Minetta Brook and Lady Warren's estate and the Bayard and Delancey estates. But there are two other streets that are pictured on this map that I would like to point out. Okay, one of these roads is called Monument Lane, which rose from around today's Washington Square Park, from around the Minetta Brook, diagonally. It went northwest up to around today's 14th Street. But there, it suddenly stopped and it turned west and ran straight to the Hudson River.
Okay.
And that smaller road that headed toward the Hudson River was called the Great Kill Road.
What a curious name, Monument Lane. Was there actually a monument here? That seems unusual.
There was. There was a 1762 obelisk that was erected to honor the British war hero, General James Wolfe. And it was placed just north of the terminus of Monument Lane. The monument would understandably disappear after about a decade in the 1770s.
Yeah, kind of a bad time to be a British war monument here, right? Wrong time and place.
But the Monument Lane itself would live on, becoming a couple decades later known as Greenwich Avenue. And that little offshoot road that went west of Monument Lane became Gansevoort Street.
Interesting. I love these origin stories. So by the 1790s, okay, so let's kind of hop over. We have spoken about the war, but New York is now a part of the United States and is, of course, about to grow quite quickly. But that city, New York, is still about 2 miles south of here. So we're still talking kind of country roads.
So rural that in the 1790s, a swampy piece of the land that the Minetta Creek ran through, over where Monument Lane started, was chosen by New York's planners to become the city's newest Potter's Field. And that Potter's Field, of course, would later be transformed, much later, into Washington Square Park.
And it's completely surreal as you kind of think about this, right? That the idea that there was a pauper's burial ground where thousands of people were buried underneath one of New York's most popular parks today. This is absolutely one of my, I guess, not a favorite fact, but certainly a strange fact about New York City that I like to share. But it will also play a very important role in the next phase of the village's history.
But something strange starts happening on maps just a few years later. Because in the 1803 plan of the city of New York, nearly all of those large family estates that we've been talking about now have streets plotted on them. You don't see a lot of houses, but wow, suddenly streets, and they are going in all kinds of directions. But soon, there would be a lot more activity up here as property owners started plotting out streets of their own. We'll follow the West Village into the 19th century after this.